Hi, everyone, and welcome to The Breakouts, a podcast where we interview extraordinary founders in just under 20 minutes. I'm your host, Akkshay Khoslaa. Now, you'll find many podcasts out there that are 2 to 3 hours long and interview these wildly successful founders after they've already made it big. But by that point, the founders are already 5, 10, or even 15 years into their journey, so their insights just aren't as actionable anymore. We're doing things a little bit different. We're interviewing founders that are on the cusp of breaking out so that you can learn the playbooks they're using to build category-defining companies today. And we're doing it in just under 20 minutes. Now, just before we get started, go ahead and follow us on Twitter at The Breakouts Pod, subscribe to this YouTube channel, and join our Discord community for aspiring founders. The link is in the description below. And I think that's everything I have for you. So without further ado, here's today's guest. Awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of The Breakouts. Today, we have Andy Schoonover one more time to discuss more about strategies, tactics, and hacks that he's used to build his business. Now, to get us started, Andy, could you summarize one more time what CrowdHealth is and what it does?
Yeah, sure. So I just had a personal experience a few years ago where health insurance failed me. And so over the last couple of years, I've built some tools that allow people to viably pay for their healthcare expenses outside of the legacy health insurance space. Those include us helping the people negotiate for those bills, and we actually have a crowdfunding component of what we do as well. So, from small bills to big bills, we can help you get those paid.
That's awesome. And if listeners want to go back and hear a little bit more about the business, the problem it solves, please refer to episode 1. One fascinating question, which I wasn't able to ask in the first segment, and I'm really curious to get your take on, do you believe there are certain types of customers for which CrowdHealth is more valuable? So, for example, if there's someone out there that has a large pre-existing condition, something maybe even as serious as cancer, is there greater value that they can derive from CrowdHealth?
Yeah, I think that one of the interesting things with us is we can help you pay for, small bills in addition to large bills, so just really quickly, the mechanics of how this works, because I think you'll find it interesting is, typically what happens is we give our premiums to our health insurance plan every month, right? With CrowdHealth, what we do is when you sign up, we actually start a bank account for you, and you put money directly into a bank account that you can then use to help other people in the community. So if you were to have a big expense like cancer, so let's just say cancer is $1 million bill, right? We would negotiate that for you. Typically what we're getting is 60% reductions versus what we're getting billed. So that $1 million bill comes down to $400,000. And oftentimes those hospitals will say, okay, well, we know that you're a self-pay patient, and so they'll stretch it out over 20 months. And so that's $20,000 a month to pay for that cancer over 20 months. And we have 2,000 people in our membership. So we would ask each person to put in $10 to help you with your cancer, whatever it may be. And so that money is transferred from their account to your account. So every time that bill came in for that cancer, you would be able to pay it directly out of your account. So that's how we deal with some of those really large bills. So we think for, whether it be a pediatrician bill or a cancer bill or a NICU bill or whatever, we believe that this is a viable way that you can pay for even those big bills.
That's amazing. I think that can be a huge unlock. I'm sure we won't get time to discuss this on the episode just due to the short format, but I'm also very curious about if there's any Web3 or tokenomics applications to this. Andy, have you explored that? Have you thought about it?
Yeah, we haven't done any tokens. We have introduced a Bitcoin crowd. We've built a community where only Bitcoiners are sharing their expenses directly with each other. And I think the previous episode we said it was $175 a month. You put that money into an account with the Bitcoin crowd, you take 75% of that and put it into Bitcoin. And then if that Bitcoin goes from, as of we're speaking today, it's about 20,000. If it goes from 20,000 to 100,000, you actually get all the upside of that Bitcoin. So instead of, writing a rent check to your health insurance plan every month, you're actually creating equity by putting money into an account it's owned by you. And so that's totally different than health insurance or anything else out there. So that's the only kind of stuff that we've got done with crypto or Web3. We haven't done any tokenization. I'm a little bit hesitant on the tokenization. I'm kind of a Bitcoin maximalist. And so, for folks out there who are, Web3 and folks like that, I think there's interesting concepts out there. But we've really kind of built our infrastructure on Bitcoin, and probably will do so for a while.
That's absolutely fascinating. Cool. Let's dive a little bit more into product and discuss some tactics that might be helpful to founders that are potentially a couple years earlier, that are just getting started. Let's start high level strategy. How would you articulate the current product strategy that you have? Like, what are the big goals or the OKRs that, of course, you're comfortable sharing publicly at this point?
Yeah, so I think if you ask pretty much everybody hates health insurance. Everybody has a horror story, especially if you're, I'm in my 40s. If you're in your 40s, 50s, 60s, you have a health insurance horror story. And so what we're really trying to do is build a new category that allows you to operate outside of that. And so it's like, okay, in terms of strategy, what are the key components of paying for your healthcare that are really important to people like me and you, right? And so then let's start there with the key components. So, when people think of health insurance, they think of, the primary thing is like, oh my gosh, what happens if we have a big event, right? You and I can figure out how to pay for a pediatrician visit. We can figure out most things. But if you have a big event, then what happens? And so I started with the big event, and so my big event is, a NICU baby, $1 million NICU baby. And your big event is going to be something else, right? Like, what is the big event in what you're trying to solve, and solve for that, right? Like, everybody wants to, like, here's the big event, and they want to build kind of functions kind of around the big event. and it's like, no. Let's focus on what is the big event, and let's solve it clearly, right? That's what I want to do. One of the things that I think entrepreneurs don't really understand now is people are so busy that you've got to figure out their big event to get them engaged, right? I mean, I probably get 20 emails a day from entrepreneurs trying to sell me something for my company, and nobody really tries to understand what my big event is. They're not trying to help me solve my big event. And so that's the way that I kind of think about, our business and in my previous businesses, what is the big event for that person. And so that's where I start, and then build the product around, truly trying to solve that big event for my customer.
That's really fascinating. Now, the big event here can be thought of as a primary pain point, and also as a trigger, right? Or an entry point as to what's going to bring the person into your product. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's right. And I say, what is the big event? And I've always kind of turned it, or in this podcast, I've turned it as a negative. The big event could be a positive, right? The big event could be, I need to, win this customer, or whatever it ends up being, right? And so I think you really got to understand what the big event is in that person's, sphere, and then try to solve that big event for them. I think too many times, and I failed at this as an entrepreneur my last time around, is trying to provide them something incremental. Make their lives incrementally better. And if it's incremental, then it's going to fall pretty low on the priority list, right? Because there's a lot of incremental changes I can make to life to make it a little bit better, but I'm going to focus on the ones that are going to solve my big event. And so, I think too many people are focusing on kind of incremental changes to your buyer's life, and not really focusing on, trying to figure out what is the big event, what drives somebody to make a change in their habits, and whether that be a direct-to-consumer habit or a business-to-business habit, right? You might be selling into businesses. What really is going to change their world? And that's what I like investing in. That's what I like working on. And I think those are the ones that have, the most significant upside.
And that makes sense. And in the context of CrowdHealth, could you give us an example of what this big event might be?
Yeah, so a big event for one of our members is everybody's worried about going to the ER and having a 50, 60, 100,000, whatever it is, event, right? And so there is a fear there that, on kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Like there's an emotional component of that if I can alleviate that fear, then that is really interesting to solving the big event for my members, right? And so I'm trying to do everything to alleviate fear of a big healthcare event, the financial repercussions of a big healthcare event, right? And I got to do that within kind of a regulatory environment that says, look, I can't promise that you're going to be able to pay your bill. And so it's a challenge for me. I'm trying to thread the needle here a little bit, but I think we've done a pretty good job of showing people mechanically how this can work. And so, in my previous job, I was selling remote patient monitoring devices into health plans. Interestingly enough, I hate health plans. I was selling into them before. And so I had to talk to nurses in these health plans that it was going to help them take better care of their members, because their big event was their members going into the hospital. Those were the things they were judged upon. So if I could display very clearly how my service was going to keep their members from going into the hospitals, I could sell a lot of devices, and I did, right? And so, what is the big event for that person that you're talking to at that moment? And can you solve it in a way that's, easy for them to use? I mean, that's you got a killer app if you can figure out how to do those two things.
I think you've articulated it really well with the concept of this big event. I'm sure this kind of entry point trigger this problem that the user faces, and when they face it, their frequency of facing it, all kind of ties into informing, well, hey, how should we actually go about acquiring users? What is the best distribution strategy here? Could you talk to us a little bit more about how CrowdHealth is currently focusing on acquiring users, and what are some things that you're thinking about how you can improve that acquisition strategy over the next months or years?
Yeah, sure. Interestingly, last year when we first raised our seed round, we didn't know who was going to buy this, right? We knew that there's a problem out there, but we didn't know who was going to buy it. And so we actually went on about 50 different podcasts, and it ranged like from, very left-leaning podcast to anarchist podcast. We focused on single guys through like Barstool Sports. We also did some podcasts on like moms, and so we did, I think it was 50 some odd, 57 or something different podcasts that we went on. We gave them all promo codes to use, and then we just watched, like, where are these people coming from, right? And, and through that, we could then say, okay, well, I'm getting a customer acquisition cost of, $2,000 here, but I'm getting a customer acquisition cost of $200 here, right? And so we really did find, like, who our core customer was, at least in this early stage. I don't know if you read the book Crossing the Chasm.
It's on my list.
Yeah. So go read it. And, as I was doing a bunch of work on like new startups. So, looking at Uber and Airbnb and kind of all the like super successful startups of our day, what they said was like, you have to start with a niche, right? You have to find your niche and go all in on that niche. And then those are going to be kind of the entrepreneurs of the category. I forget exactly in Crossing the Chasm what they call it, but disruptors. That's what they call it, Crossing the Chasm, right? Those are your disruptors. Those are your early adopters. Actually, it's the innovators, the disruptors are the first group, and then if you can get that group to buy in and be really, really excited, then the early adopters are the next group, right? So like find a core customer group and then go all in on it. Right? Because if you try to shotgun it and spray it across the universe, you're not going to be effective. Like find your core customer and go all in on that core customer. And then what we're hoping is that core customer or that demographic expands once people get comfortable that CrowdHealth can help you viably pay for your healthcare expenses. So right now, interestingly, my core customer are Bitcoiners. They're libertarians, they're Bitcoiners, They're people that kind of throw out the middle finger to, government solutions for healthcare. They want to be personally responsible for their own health, right? Like that is my core customer right now. I have 2,000 of them, and they are like huge CrowdHealth fans because I give them the ability to be personally responsible for their health. Now look, that is a controversial group, right? And so how do I not offend the moms, who, by the way, make 75% of the healthcare decisions, but still, really relate to, the Bitcoiners and the libertarians of the world, right? And so that's where we're trying to make sure that we, don't do anything really silly. Although, we're a lot of Bitcoiners internally at our organization, so it's kind of easy for us because it's our crew. But we're going all in on that core customer, and that's what I would say for any entrepreneur. Find that core customer, go all in. Don't shotgun, spray it across the universe because it's going to be a huge waste of capital. And especially if you're kind of on a seed round of your investment, you need to use that capital as efficiently as possible.
That makes a lot of sense. I think at a strategy level, focusing in on your beachhead audience, the audience that faces your problem the most or faces it most heavily and it is most eager to adopt, I think, that's some great advice. What I'm also curious about is, so the strategy you outlined that worked for you guys, hey, going on all of these podcasts and then measuring what is your customer acquisition cost on the basis of it. It seems like when you're going from 0 to 1 or 0 to 10 maybe, or in your case, 0 to a couple of thousand, that would work going to all of these different podcasts. But I think the challenge there is, well, beyond that, how do you come up with a strategy that's repeatable? Because it's difficult to go on the same podcast over and over. So if you identify one podcast with a great CAC, you might not necessarily be able to go back to it frequently. So how do you think about repeatable acquisition strategies?
Yeah, interestingly enough, we've been on the same group of maybe like 10 podcasts for the last year. And our CAC in that is getting lower and lower and lower and lower, interestingly. And so for us, it is one that, how do you scale that? And, what we've learned is that the more times people hear about it, the more comfortable they are with it, right? And so as we're building, this group of people, we're starting to gather stories. We're starting to gather reviews. We're starting to gather these pieces of feedback that we can then share with others via social media and other types of communication, where we're starting to get more and more people who are further up that crossing the chasm curve than our initial 500 people. So just to give you kind of some stats, our initial 500 people, we had 1.2 members per sign up, right? So if you signed up for you and on average 0.2 others. Does that make sense? So, some people would sign up with one person and some people would sign up with a family of 2 and some people would sign up with a family of 3. On average, you were signing up for 1.2 people. We're now at 1.7 people, right? So our initial 500 was 1.2. Now we're on average of all 2,000 people at 1.7, which means that more families are getting comfortable with this. And so they're willing to sign up with more kids and things like that, right? Single males, when I was in my mid-20s, I couldn't give a rip, right? Like, I'd be like, oh, that sounds like cool. Let's give it a try. That, I have less to lose, right? Now I got a family, there's more to lose. And so I'm a little bit more risk averse when it comes to the healthcare of my family, but we're sharing stories. I think these stories are so important. We had a guy in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, $83,000, his local hospital. We found one for $22,000. And that's 75% difference. He saved $60,000 by helping us. And this was a guy with a family, right? And so we made a video of it. We shared it. And that, like, people see that with families and they're like, wow, like, this is incredible. Like, I can actually negotiate for my health expenses. And so we're trying to build some of that. In addition to that, referrals are the absolute king of CAC, right? Like, somebody who loves your product and will refer somebody else, that CAC is next to nothing. And so we're starting a lot of those referrals coming in now too.
Are those organic, or have you thought about engineering certain flows in, whether that's rewards for referring, whether that is just simply how you build the workflows within your product. Are you trying to push for referrals, or are they just happening organically and you're kind of flowing with it right now?
Yeah, man, honestly, it's been happening organically. And to me, that's kind of exciting because I see some more upside here if we can actually build it into our process to say, hey, do you have any friends or family or whoever, did you like CrowdHealth? Yes, great. Do you know anybody else? And so starting October 1st, we're actually going to have an internal referral system so that if you do refer somebody, then we can, compensate you as a result of that. So we think we're going to get a really big bump here in October, November, December. We're taping this in September. So in the next, 3 or 4 months, we're going to have a big upside on that from a little bit more of a systematic approach to getting some of these referrals, given that they are, so inexpensive.
That makes sense. That's a very strong signal that you're getting organic referrals. I'm curious, moving to fundraising. Now, you guys raised Series A recently and a seed last year, correct?
Yeah. Seed was April of 2021. And then we raised an A round in August of 2022.
And between the two rounds, it was around 12.1 million. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. 12.1.
That's awesome. I'm curious, on the fundraising front, it seems like fundraising is a concept for many early stage founders that it's kind of confounding because it's not, traditional to any kind of product engineering or acquisition work. So I'm curious if there was one tip that you had to give to early stage founders who are about to go out and raise a seed, what would it be?
One piece of advice. I would say, tell a story and have a conversation. Okay, so it may seem simple, right? Is if you can tell a convincing story within a conversation, that's where I've had most success in really connecting to other people, other VCs. I always say, conversations, not presentations. If you get into a presentation, it usually means death.
Right.
I'm almost like 100 for 100. If I'm forced to go into my deck, then I have failed. Right. So, that's just my personal, approach is I want to have a conversation with these people about the problem that I see in the world and then tell a story around how we can solve that problem. And if we need to go to a deck to say, hey, let me show you exactly what I mean by that. Here's, the slide in my deck. Man, if you're walking through a deck, it is almost certain death from my perspective. So go in with a good story, a good narrative, and have a conversation, not a presentation.
I think that's phenomenal advice, especially now that, more and more fundraising over the past 2 years is beginning to happen over Zoom. When you're in the same room, you can gauge how a person is feeling, whether they're getting bored, they're tuning out. But on a Zoom call, I think it becomes even more important to focus on the conversation rather than the deck.
Yeah. And then kind of go back to what I talked about earlier, understand what the big event is, right? In your consumer, in your buyer's world, and make sure you have a really clear story about how you're going to solve that big event for your end buyer.
Awesome. Cool. Well, hey, Andy, we're coming up just about on time here. Right before we wrap up, I wanted to give another chance to plug anything. Andy, you're still hiring, that's correct?
Yes. Come see us. Send your CV to hey@joincrowdhealth.com. That's HEY@joincrowdhealth.com. Or you can DM me or CrowdHealth on Twitter. It's Join CrowdHealth on Twitter, or Schoonover Andy on Twitter. Either way, send us your CV. We'd love to take a look and see if we could work together. If you want to join, if this sounds like something interesting to anybody, it's just joincrowdhealth.com.
Awesome. And you guys are hiring engineers or product people, or who are you looking for right now?
Yeah, engineers, product, and ops. I mean, we just raised our round about a month ago, and so we're very much in hiring mode. We're growing pretty fast, and so we're looking for great people.
Awesome. Cool. And lastly, Andy, where can our listeners follow you on Twitter, LinkedIn, where works best?
Yeah, Twitter's best. That's where I spend most of my time. So Twitter is by far the best place to hit me. And again, that's Schoonover, SCHOONOVER, Andy is my handle.
Awesome. Cool. Well, I think that wraps up the show. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time on the breakouts. Andy, thank you so much for providing all these insights. You were phenomenal.
Thanks, sir. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
All right, and that wraps up today's episode. We really hope you enjoyed it. Now, just before I let you go, I wanted to reiterate one thing. We're trying to build the best podcast out there for aspiring entrepreneurs, and to do that, we need your help. The best way you can help us is by joining our Discord community. The link is in the description below, and then leaving us feedback. Tell us how we did. Tell us how we can improve. We're eagerly waiting to hear from you. Other than that, show us some love and follow us on Twitter at The Breakouts Pod. And I think that's everything I have for you. We'll see you next time on The Breakouts.